Welcome to the solution video for the ASP.NET Core with Docker challenge. Let's start in a little different place than normal. We're going to start with Azure DevOps. So here I have my Azure DevOps open, and I'm going to create a new project. And the reason I'm starting here is because I know that I'm going to want it eventually, and it's just a little easier to do it now versus later. However, if you want to add it later, it's not the end of the world. What you do is create a new project in Azure, which opens up this. If you want to just go to the command prompt and do the same thing, you just navigate to this path, and then I'm going to say git clone and paste in that path. I hit enter, and that's the path they copied from over here. So now that it's done, we have our folder core with Docker demo. And so we're all set to get started. Let's copy this path now, and let's go to Visual Studio. And Visual Studio, I have nothing here, so let's go to File, Start Window, and I am going to create a new project. Again, I could have gone here and said clone or check out code. I find it's a little clunkier actually in some ways than doing it this way. So create a new project, and let's go with an ASP.NET Core web application. Let's call this our Core with Docker. And the solution name is Core with Docker Demo. Notice that matches exactly the folder name that was created, and it matches the project in Azure DevOps. Now I will paste in that path. Notice I don't have the /core with Docker demo. What it's going to do is create this folder, but it already exists. And then inside that folder, it will put the solution file. So we'll hit create. And then we'll say web application core 3.0. So .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 3.0 web application. Yes, we want Docker support, and it's going to be for Linux. We will not add authentication. And yes, I have Docker Desktop installed. If you don't have Docker Desktop installed, go to hub.docker.com, sign in, and on the right-hand side, there'll be a link to install Docker Desktop. Again, that's hub.docker.com. All right, we create that, and we can watch in this folder here, it actually now created our solution file and the project. So let's put it in the correct location for our Git. And if we go to Team Explorer and we go to Changes, we'll see that we actually have the changes that we just added, which is basically everything. And now it looks like, let's start this with Core with Docker, not with Docker itself, just the using Kestrel. And doing so does bring up our containers list right here. I actually have a container that's started now with my Docker. And over here it says, okay, so you've got 5001. We've actually got something open here. I don't see it opening up in my URL. Aha, there it is. It opened minimized. So there is our Docker with Docker demo. It's not running in Docker yet. It's just running locally, but we do have HTTPS, and it's a demo. It is what it is. Now, let's actually, one of the parts of the challenge is make sure that you have it running in Docker and that you can then make changes and see that in Docker. So let's go ahead, Docker, and hit run. And this is going to do the first part of the Docker script. It's not going to do the entire Docker build that you expect because it's trying to do some work with debugging and connecting to the debugger. And so it's not going to do the removing the source code and all the rest from the Docker container. Now it looks like it may have crashed. Let's try it again. So let's look at the output here to see what's happening. And the output says that it was not possible to find any compatible framework version. The specified framework of version 3.0 was not found, but it did find Preview 9. So I'm using the preview version of Visual Studio, and .NET Core 3.0 just came out, and so I have it installed in Visual Studio, but I don't think I have it installed as the SDK. So here's what I did. I paused the video and I went down to .net.microsoft.com/download, and I downloaded the .NET Core SDK and installed that. That is free to do. Now, I'm not sure if I have to restart Visual Studio or not. Let's find out. It appears I do because it says it still can't resolve that. Okay, so I figured out the issue finally. I paused the video and tried like 18 different things. And part of it was I was kind of banging my head against the wall, trying different things instead of thinking through what the issue probably was. And the issue turns out to be that I had a bad image locally. I had pulled down an image of .NET that was a preview version and hadn't updated to the latest release version. So I pulled up my command line here and I did Docker images. Now I don't have anything right now. I've wiped it all out. But there was an image here that had it was a preview version. So what I did was I ran the command docker RMI and put a $sign and then parens docker images -q. Essentially, I wiped out every single image. I deleted everything. Now, if you are bandwidth restricted, that might not be the best thing to do. In which case, just delete the images that are bad, you think. In this case, the image I was looking for that was the older version was this one right here. Now, if you already have an image that relies on this one, you need to delete that image as well first. And if an image relies on that image, you have to delete that image as well. And so that's where I just did you know what? It's a demo machine. Let's nuke the whole thing and start over. And so I wiped everything out and started over. So it's up to you if you want to do that or not. But now that I have no images, let's go ahead and build this again. And this time it should be in the output window we see it's pulling layers. Notice that it's pulling layers. What that's doing is it's pulling down the images. So in this case, there's that image right there that's pulling down. So if we come now and look at this screen, and let's go to Docker images again, notice we have a couple of Docker images. We have Docker Core or Docker with Core, and we have that mcr.microsoft.com image that's the latest version. It's a 3.0 version. So with that, it now starts with, whoops, there we go, sorry about that. It now starts with the latest version, and it is working on HTTPS. So if you notice there, right there is HTTPS. And so if we were to go over here and look at our containers window, which that's a new feature in Visual Studio, is be able to view the containers. We also notice we have this port right here, 52424. That's the HTTP port. So if we came to localhost, let's wipe the whole thing out and say localhost colon 52424. That's the HTTP version. So I click that, notice it redirects to the 44321. That's the HTTPS version. So it is working in our container and it is working with HTTPS in the redirect. So the only thing left to do for this demo will be to then work on making sure we can see changes. So let's make a quick change here. Let's go to our index page, and instead of saying welcome, we could say welcome YouTubers. Just that. We can hit run on our Docker container again. That's going to build a new version of our image and then spool up a new container for that. And now we get this welcome YouTubers. So that's the new container running. And we can tell it's a new container because if we go to our containers window, we can see that Frosty Jackson, it's a new version of our container. Okay? So with that being said, and notice that even though I hit stop, it's still technically running. So if I click on, let's just say a TCP, it's going to crash out because of the fact that the debugger is not running, but the image or the container is still running. So I typically just go ahead and delete that just to kind of clean things up. So that satisfies our primary challenge. Let's go ahead and commit all these changes, which is basically everything here. We can review it to make sure that there's nothing surprising here, and there doesn't seem to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit all of this and just say initial code commit. Now notice that I haven't selected anything and staged it. In Visual Studio, if you don't stage anything, it stages everything. I debate between myself if I like that or not, but it is convenient with these very large changes. Instead of adding this top layer and saying stage, we could just stage without it. So either way, I hit commit, I go to sync, and I push those changes out. And now those changes should be on the server. We go and look here and go to our commits. We should see that new commit. We do. And we should see our files, which we do as well. So now it should be that we can go to our pipeline and attempt the bonus challenge, which is to create a pipeline. Now, for this, they've gone to this idea of a YAML build pipeline. It's not great when you first start out because of the fact that it's not very visual. You can make it visual, and there are some aids for that. But I really like the classic editor. So let's click down there and go to classic editor. Just hit continue, and now you can continue on with the classic editor. So I'm going to select Docker container and hit apply. This is going to create for me a Docker build cycle. And in fact, it's not only a build cycle, it's also a build and push cycle. And with it, it's got a build an image and then push an image. So I'm going to build an image, and I'm going to say, first of all, here's my Azure subscription, which I have to then authorize. And once I do that, then it's going to be authorized, and I can then look for my Azure container registry, which I have created a container registry here. In Azure, to create a container registry, just search for container registry and hit create. And then fill out these fields. Resource group, which can be anything you want it to be. It's basically just a little network kind of thing. And then down here, the SKU, this is where we talk about pricing. And don't get freaked out about pricing, because let's go to the calculator. And if we look at the basic tier, for 30 days, so 1 month, it's $5 for the entire tier. Now this says $7.17. That's because I added 30. Here is the include latest tag. So whenever you build a new image, it's going to tag it as the latest. That way, in your tag system, people know that this is the one to use since it's the latest build. And then push. Same thing here. We select our Azure connection. We select our container registry. And then we just push the image. And that's all it's going to be. It's going to push that up to Azure. So you can save this, and that's all there is to the build pipeline for Docker. Not a lot to it, but that gives you the opportunity to set up and build your containers and put them into an image, a container registry in the cloud. Okay, so it's up to you if you want to do that and go that far, but at least this shows you how to do it. Let's go ahead and just hit Q just to see what happens. So it's going to do an Azure build pipeline on an Ubuntu agent. That's fine. And we hit run. And this is now queued. So we can look at this and wait for the queue to be complete. It's now starting out and starting the build process. It's checked out our code, and it's now building the image. Notice there it's pulling down those layers. This is where having your own build agent instead of using Microsoft's will be helpful, because it will have cached this pulling down the layers and won't have to do that every time. It'll make your build a lot faster. So now it's doing step 5 out of 17. This is a pretty informative process in the fact that it tells you exactly what's going on at every step, and you know Visual Studio launches the Docker tools, and I am not a huge fan of some of the things they do, because a lot of it's just kind of magic and extra stuff they add on top. I don't think I want to break it here. Instead, let's look at what we can do inside the build agent itself. So let's say edit on our build tool, go to build an image, and right down here in our build arguments is where we could change where it's looking for that Docker file, or where it says the context is for that Docker file. But right down here it says use default build context, which is set the build context to the directory that contains the Docker file. We actually don't want to do that, because that, remember I said before that it's assuming that this Docker file is actually located in the solution, because of the fact it says core with Docker / core with Docker CS proj. If it was in the same file or the same level as the project, it would just say core with docker.cs proj, and then it would just say / here for copying all the files. So with that, we change this checkbox, use default build context. Let's save and queue that. So that should be that what it does is it uses the context of the root of our solution, not the location where the Docker file is, to be the root of our context. And the context means where we're starting from, the starting folder or location. So let's go into our job here. And remember I said before that it'd be helpful if we use our own build system or build agent, because of the fact that it doesn't have to do this download every time. This is kind of a pain as far as time goes. It's going to take some time to download all these files. Not an enormous amount of time, but we could have skipped these steps if we had our own build agent, because it would cache these downloads. But right now we're on step 5 out of 17 before we failed on step 7 out of 17. So it's downloading. Now we're on step 6. We set the working directory to /source. And now we've gone on step 7, and that seems to have worked, because now we're at step 8. Now we're at step 9, where we're copying. Step 11, where we've done the build, it looks like. The build is completing with 0 warnings and 0 errors. That's good. It shouldn't have any. Now step 13, 16, and step 17. We've successfully completed, and now we are pushing our image to our container registry. We just finished the push, and now we should be done. Report status is complete. So if we come back over here, we have the green check mark that it worked. Okay, so now in our Azure container registry, we should have our image. So if we come down here to our repositories, we notice we have core with Docker demo. Inside here, we have our repository with one item, and it has these tags. And there's the information about it. It's a Linux AMD slash AMD 64, and it's core with Docker demo. So there's our information. There's a schema for it if you want to see a schema as far as size and other information for the different layers on it. But that's our image in the container. So now we have an image in the container registry. So now if you wanted to pull this locally, this is the pull command right here. So you just need to copy this, and then you can come to your PowerShell, and you could say just paste that in, and it should pull down. Now right now I'm not authorized. I got to authenticate in order to do that. I'm not going to do that here, but that's all you need to do to then pull that down and start using that container registry as if it were Docker's container registry, only it's your private containers. So your private images, I'm sorry. It's a container registry that holds images, which is confusing. Okay, but it's your private container registry, so you can do with it as you want. All right, so that's set up and that's working. So now the only thing I have to do is in our pipeline, so let's go back to here. I'm going to select the Core Docker demo and I'm going to say edit. And the last thing I want to do is I want to set this up to have a trigger to say enable continuous integration. So whenever you commit to the master branch, it's going to build this, run this build. It's going to run this build pipeline, which technically this build pipeline builds and deploys. So, but now with that checkbox, which is under triggers, that's all we have to do to satisfy the bonus challenge. So now whenever we commit code, it's going to commit the code and then trigger this build, which is going to go all the way through and put the image into the Azure Container Registry for us, which means now we could then pull that down if we were authorized. We could pull that down like any other image. So at the end of the day, the actual stuff, as long as it all works, is pretty simple. There's not a lot to it. There's not a lot of different moving parts. But you're going to run into some bumps along the road. So you ran along, the first bump was that old version of the image, which we had to get cleaned out by removing all of our images and re-downloading them. And the next bump was the fact that it wouldn't do the build because of that checkbox for the default location for our path. And so you uncheck that and solve that problem. So there's a couple different bumps along the way, but once you got past those, it all works. And so now we have a process where we have a web application that we can make changes to locally, we can commit to, we can push those changes, and it will create a new image for us, which we can then deploy either to Azure or even locally, but pull it down from that Azure Container Registry, our private container registry. Okay, so that's all there is to both the primary and bonus challenges for this week. Hopefully that triggered a few things in you that you learned something new, or maybe you kind of stretched your knowledge a little bit. Okay, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.